Open world gaming has been a huge part of my life for a while now. Whether that be exploring through the grand mountains of Skyrim or roaming the vast countryside in Red Dead Redemption, I can easily admit that open world is by far my favorite style of gaming. However, I've always had one big gripe about most games in this genre, which is that most of the worlds themselves are never quite utilized to their fullest potential. Sure, they may contain some great questing and mesmerizing locations, but most of these games' maps often just feel like hub worlds to contain all these smaller elements, while exploring the worlds themselves is usually made out to be tedious, boring, and overall subpar to everything else. That is, until I've experienced Breath of the Wild, a game that puts limitless exploration and player freedom above all else to create easily the most cohesive and developed world in gaming history. This game is truly a breath of fresh air for the genre, and that is why I want to share with you all what makes Zelda's experience truly stand out from the rest. One of the biggest setbacks I have with most open world games is the lack of navigational variety, because for the most part, you really only have one of two choices to explore most of these worlds: traveling by foot or traveling by horse. Sure, this is a workable system for basic point-to-point travel, but is hopelessly unmatched by the grand variety offered in Breath of the Wild, with the ability to climb freeform, paraglide, surf on your shield, swim up waterfalls, and so many other diverse methods that give the player more options when exploring this world. The climbing and paragliding are by far the two most noteworthy though, as they add an element to this adventure that is barely explored in any other open world games, which is verticality. This allows the player to think three-dimensionally about the space that they exist in, rather than just always marching from point A to point B in a two-dimensional manner. And the important thing is, unlike other open world games that rely heavily on waypoints and dotted lines to move between objectives, Breath of the Wild offers little to no instruction on where to go or even how to get there, allowing the player to make their own routes and destinations as they travel. And believe it or not, the way a world can be traversed is a huge factor in affecting the way a map was originally designed as well. Think of the world as an extension to the player's moveset, and if the player only has the option of getting places by walking or horseback riding, every single place in the world must be designed to be reachable by only one of these methods. This means that no mountain can exist without a walkable path leading up it, and no terrain can be too harsh or rigid to avoid the player from getting stuck in a tight space with no way out. But with the variety offered in Breath of the Wild through its climbing and gliding, the map designers had a lot more freedom and creativity with the way they could design the world, which birthed some of the most unique terrains and environments in any open world to date. For example, a place like the Faron Jungle just simply wouldn't exist in most other open world games, as its steep inclines and waterfalls would be literally impossible to explore without the traversal methods of Breath of the Wild, which is a shame because it's unique areas like these that make the game's world stand out from the rest. People may not even see the other game's limited traversability as a flaw at first though, thinking that not every open world game needs to have climbing or paragliding systems. But then why are people always trying to find ways to glitch their way up mountains in games like Skyrim in order to carve their own route, rather than just following the path set up for them? People have always been wanting the sense of freedom in open world games for a while now, and while other games have blatantly told the player no in the past, Breath of the Wild seems to be the first game to cater to the way that people have always wanted to play all along. But even with great traversal mechanics, what good is an open world game if the contents inside the world don't live up to par? Fortunately, this doesn't seem to be a problem for most of these games, as they usually have their great share of towns, dungeons, and structures that really make these worlds stand out. However, the main issue I have with these games is that the space in between all these areas is usually left quite barren, with little to no content within them. Sure, there might be some nice scenery and maybe even a few enemies here and there, but it's really nothing compared to how well Breath of the Wild space is utilized, whether that be through its hidden caves, chests, Korok seeds, and so many other things that breathe life into every inch of this world. This is also what puts the game's various traversal methods to good use, as knowing that this world is littered with things to explore, I am actually encouraged to go off the beaten path and make discoveries at my own pace. This is what makes Breath of the Wild's open world exploration feel like an important part of the gameplay, rather than a sub-process you must slog through to find your next objective. Putting the exploration part aside though, there is one extra layer of depth that Breath of the Wild adds that is rarely executed well in any other open world game, which is problem solving. I'm not just talking about the puzzles found in the shrines and divine beasts, but rather how the player can use both real life and in-game knowledge to overcome their obstacles. Carrying a flame blade to keep yourself warm in the winter, chopping down a tree to bridge a large gap in your path, and even weaponizing a large metal boulder with magnesis are just a few examples of how creativity and thinking outside the box can really be rewarding in the world of Zelda. Considering that the player is given the majority of their moves and abilities at the very start of the game, a player's skill level isn't determined by how many perks they have received or what their XP level is. but rather, a player's skill is determined by how well they have mastered the arts and mechanics of the game. This is how most skilled and experienced players are able to beat high-level Lynels and Blade Cannons right off the Great Plateau, while taking down similar tier foes right off the bat in other games would be virtually impossible, as a player's current skill level is more heavily restricted by an XP system. And of course, this same idea can also be applied to the game's shrines and divine beasts, whose puzzles and challenges may be hard to overcome at first, but as you start developing your problem-solving skills and mastery of the game's mechanics, solving these puzzles will become so much more fluent to the player that you may even start finding your own ways to overcome them. Last but not least, there is one more major point that I would like to bring up that separates Breath of the Wild away from its counterparts, and that is how it handles its main story progression. You see, playing through the main questline in most other open world games tends to be a very linear experience, where a player can rarely do things out of order, and is often asked to do a lot of point-to-point traversing throughout. This creates a very negative contrast to the general free roam nature of the game itself. And often, switching between following the main questline and exploring the world can feel like two entirely different games. However, Breath of the Wild fixes this problem by integrating most of its story elements seamlessly within the world itself to create one grand cohesive experience. The biggest factor in this is that most of the main story events can be completed in any order that you want, so you aren't restricted to following one single questline after the other. Also, this game does something very unique when it comes to progression, and that is how the player can confront and face the final boss at literally any point in their adventure. Keeping this in mind, that means that everything you do in the world of Hyrule, whether that be completing a divine beast, shrine, or even collecting Korok seeds, are all important in building your character up for this final encounter with Ganon, whenever you choose to take him on. This level of progressive freedom has been unheard of in open world games before this, and this is what makes Breath of the Wild's approach to its main questline stand out. But despite this, just because a lot of open world games don't have the freedom of Breath of the Wild doesn't exactly make that a bad thing. Games like The Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2 utilize a more linear structure to tell a deep, thought-provoking story that would not be as apparent in a non-linear game like Breath of the Wild. And for people who really value the story element of these games above all else, I can see why you think these games are more enjoyable than ones like Breath of the Wild. But where Zelda's magic shines through is by allowing all of its various elements to work together in a cohesive manner, and absolutely no part of these adventures ever feel dull or uninspired. Everything in this world exists for a purpose, and throughout Zelda's creative world design, diverse traversability, and emphasis on player freedom, I still believe that Breath of the Wild is the true king of open world games. Anyways, thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already to support the channel. Also, a big shout out to my amazing patrons for all of your incredible support. I'll leave a link down in the description below if you would like to help me out here as well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.